Tensions are high in the nation's capital just days after impeachment and now just 72 hours until Inauguration Day. This week we're talking with Indiana Congressman Andre Carson and Jim Banks, plus Governor Holcomb's second term underway, with Indiana's new AG in the headlines his first week in office. It's all ahead this Sunday in Focus.
Exploring the issues that matter most in Indiana. This is In Focus with Dan Spieler.
We're going to ensure that we have a safe inauguration, that President-elect Joe Biden, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are sworn in as the new President and Vice President of the United States in a manner consistent with our history, with our traditions, in a way that gives honor to the American people and to the United States.
Vice President Pence meeting with federal officials ahead of the inauguration on Wednesday. He also took time to meet with members of the National Guard stationed at the U.S. Capitol, thanking them for their service. Good morning. I'm Dan Spieler. Ahead of the inauguration on Wednesday, security is being stepped up around the country with the threat of armed protest in all 50 states and in the nation's capital. This as President Trump now goes down in history as the first president to be impeached twice. The House impeaching him this past week on charges of inciting an insurrection. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin has more.
Exactly 1 week after a mob unleashed a deadly attack at the U.S. Capitol, House lawmakers moved to hold President Trump responsible.
He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation.
Wednesday, House lawmakers debated the article of impeachment, which charges President Trump with inciting the violent insurrection.
Man up, woman up, and defend this Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, including Donald J. Trump.
Unlike the last impeachment effort, several Republicans voiced support.
There is no excuse for President Trump's actions.
But the vast majority pushed back.
I cannot think of a more petty, vindictive, and gratuitous act.
Congressman Tom McClintock and Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan insist impeaching the president just a week before he leaves office is too divisive.
Do not know where all this goes. And this is frightening for the country.
Illinois Republican Rodney Davis instead called on Congress to investigate the attacks.
Republicans and Democrats need to work together.
But Democrats say the real problem is the president's false claim that the election was stolen.
They took down the American flag and replaced it with a Trump flag. Is this the kind of country you want to live in?
And that was Raquel Martin reporting. Here's how Indiana's members of Congress voted along party lines, including the state's newest representatives. You'll see the other 4 representatives there. Both of those new representatives spoke on the House floor Wednesday afternoon.
Any accusations must go through the proper due process, whether it's election fraud or an impeachable offense.
I support the article of impeachment so that we can move forward to do the work that our constituents sent us here to do.
Indiana's 2 newest members of Congress there. This week, I also had a chance to speak with Congressman Andre Carson, who voted to impeach the president and also faced threats as part of another plot uncovered in the nation's capital. Here's what he told me about the decision to impeach.
Why do you feel like this is the move that needs to be made with just a week left in the president's term?
Well, it was a very sad, but I believe necessary duty today to vote to impeach the president again. But, you know, I swore an oath to protect and defend our Constitution and our democracy, which means Donald Trump must be removed from office before he does more damage or more lives are endangered or even lost. So it is very encouraging to me that we were able to vote to impeach. It was done with bipartisan support, quite frankly, in the People's House. It encouraged me to see some of my colleagues stand up and do the right thing for our country. You know, unfortunately, some of those who voted against the impeachment today, they justified their failure to act by saying it will cause more division, but they clearly deliberately ignore the division inflamed by Donald Trump and their blind loyalty to his baseless claims of election fraud. I think that they share his denial that he lost the election, and instead they doubled down on efforts to disenfranchise voters, millions of voters, particularly Black and brown voters.
Do you think that there is a realistic chance the Senate will vote to convict the president, even if that trial doesn't come until after his term is complete?
I'd like to think so. A lot of my colleagues spoke on the floor today about healing, but healing and reconciliation cannot occur without remorse, repentance, and acknowledgement of the harm and damage their actions and complicity have caused. I really don't know what hurts people the most, the dangerous actions of Donald Trump to incite attacks against Congress, or just watching his enablers on the House floor, and hopefully not the Senate, tortuously contort themselves into defending his words and deeds.
Congressman Andre Carson there. This week, we also heard from Indiana Congressman Jim Banks, who spoke with our Washington bureau on Wednesday.
Now is not the time to impeach the president again. After everything this country has been through, this does nothing more to bring us together. It divides us further. So that's why I will be voting against impeachment. Is the president perfect? No. Has he made mistakes? He's made many. That being said, I'll defend his record. He's had a strong record for our country for 4 years. What we saw last Wednesday, 1 week ago from today, happen in our United States Capitol is something that is going to live with this country forever. Those images, we need to learn from it. I support a bipartisan commission to dig into the activities that happened that day so that we can make sure that it never happens again. But it doesn't deserve impeachment for a president who's going to leave office in 7 days anyway. This is a rushed impeachment effort by the Democrats. It's an effort designed to politicize the moment even further and divide America further apart. When in 7 days a new president will be inaugurated, and President Trump has declared all along, especially more so in recent days, that he supports a peaceful transfer of power, which is what makes this country unique, is that we, every 4 years, have that peaceful transfer of power. It's going to happen again a week from today, and I'll be out on the stage with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle and with a new president in President Biden to celebrate that pivotal moment in American history as we transfer power from President Trump to President Biden. Now's the time to bring us together. I had hoped that President-elect Biden would speak out against this impeachment effort, and maybe he still will, as he recognizes that this is not the moment. This is not a healthy time to go through this process once again.
Okay, I'm joined now by Importantville's Adam Wren as we talk about some of these Indiana lawmakers, Adam, Congressman Banks included, who've been losing donations from major corporations after the riots in D.C.
That's right. You know, for a congressman like Jim Banks, who has to fundraise here pretty soon again for the 2022 cycle, you know, this hurts him. He's someone who actually came down to Indianapolis, left his district to hold fundraisers here in this part of the state. And so a signal like the one that we got this week from Eli Lilly, you know, sends a signal to kind of the corporate community, the corporate fabric of Indianapolis, where a lot of the money is in the state, that, you know, this is a lawmaker that they may not be able to support in the future. So this is a huge signal from someone like Eli Lilly.
Another congressman who voted against the certification, Representative Jim Baird, also facing some pushback this past week from Indiana Democrats for some of the remarks he made about the riots.
That's right. You know, we have a sort of a bipartisan duty as a country to really figure out what happened. And it doesn't seem like, based on the congressman's comments, that we even agree about the language to use for what happened, whether it's an insurrection, whether the president was responsible for inciting it. There's not even agreement on that. So we're really fractured as a nation right now.
Congressman Baird saying in an interview with the Lafayette TV station he did not think it was an insurrection. Adam, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Meantime, as the president-elect prepares to take office Wednesday, Indiana's governor was just sworn in for his second term in office, along with a new attorney general.
For Indiana, the future is now. Preserving our liberty requires more than just speeches and promises. It demands real, on-the-ground work and attention.
Todd Rokita also in the news this week. One of only 4 attorneys general who declined to sign a letter condemning the riots in D.C., saying he wanted to see the nation's AGs say more about the riots from over the summer. Let's turn right now to Abdul Hakim Shabazz from IndyPolitics.org. Abdul, the new attorney general, already making some waves here in his first week on the job.
Yes, Todd Rokita has been known to make a headline or two in his day, and he's been pretty much consistent. One thing I thought was interesting, though, this week was when Todd Rokita posted that he stood for Donald Trump, and then posted another tweet saying he wanted to sort of, test sort of the free speech of the internet since the president was removed from Twitter. And I think Todd proved his point that free speech does work as long as you don't violate your terms of service in those social media contracts. Donald Trump apparently did, and so he was removed from Twitter. Because we got to remember that the First Amendment and free speech does not apply to private individuals. It applies primarily to the government. And if you as an individual violate that free speech, then like Donald Trump, you're removed. Like Todd Rokita, you get to stay.
All right, we may see protests here this week in Indiana as well. The governor also delivering his State of the State on Tuesday, perhaps to a much smaller group of lawmakers in the House chamber. A lot of the details still being worked out as we talk about all of the COVID precautions, the security concerns really around the country this week.
Yes, we spoke to the governor this past week, as well as the Senate President and House Speaker, and they all admitted that, yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a different twist to the governor's State of the State address. Because first of all, we don't even know if he's going to even do it in the House chamber, or if he's going to do it over in the government center where the House currently meets. So we got that going on. Also, like you're right, we're going to be keeping an eye on this week on those protests as well. There's a protest Sunday at noon, and also another protest Wednesday at noon as well. From my contact with IMPD, everything expects to be relatively peaceful, but still, you can never be too careful in times like this.
Yeah, protests expected there at the State House. Abdul, thank you so much. Stay safe. We appreciate it. Coming up next, this Sunday in Focus, we'll talk with the rest of our panel about the impeachment and the inauguration. Plus, what about Vice President Pence? We're looking back at these last 4 years and the impact of these last few weeks. And we're talking about Indiana schools. As the governor lays out his budget plan, educators are also asking when they'll be able to get the coronavirus vaccine. Stick around. We'll be right back.